Personal Recollection of Tizikikoonazikiakakiatkata, also known as Tika, Senior Ambassador to the Galactic SenateHead of Diplomatic Relations CouncilTurinika Conclave. Log has been partitioned for study by Diplomatic Relations Council. First partition, begin log. We knew the Terrans had been building, but when I saw the returns on the display, the sight took my breath away. We had just shed the vapor-like trails of exiting from the hyperspace channel when everyone seemed to collectively turn their heads to the display overlaid on the broad viewport overlooking the darkness of the Kelvin system. That's when the returns came in. The entire bridge of my small diplomatic skimmer was silent. Even my adjutant Kzia had stopped her incessant squawking. Terrans, or humans as we had initially called them, had a fleet on hand that was, to be blunt, absolutely terrifying. Before we had even realized we were all holding our collective breaths, the entire display suddenly chimed what sounded like 1,000 times over from registered queries from the fleet, all of them outlined first in a soft white, then a glaring hot orange. Weapons were being locked. For a moment, a dread-filled moment, I wondered if this was how a diplomatic career of over 230 rotations was going to end, evaporated under a hail of fire from a fleet that shouldn't exist, from a people that every estimate said should have been subjugated or enslaved 12 times over. The orange hues faded as quickly as they began, however. That's when I breathed out. I ruffled my feathers to cool myself. The instinct to take flight when danger presents itself still has its side effects, you know. The rush of blood to heat the body to withstand the wind and cold. The sudden rigid arch of my wings that needed to be compelled to relax. The sublight engines had already kicked on, but we were in idle station holding. I don't think my navigator wanted to approach what was waiting in the dark. My species has never liked the dark. The endless night outside the viewport looked like a house's doorway unguarded with its door open. In the dark, like I was seeing out of the viewport, we would sit in our homes and close all of our windows, hiding from the night like it was a predator. In times of fear, when faced with the night, some of our more shameful kind would squall and push themselves against the furthest wall from the dark, praying to the Great Mother, staring in wide-eyed terror at the darkness, just hoping we didn't see the darkness staring back. Looking out of the viewport, we all felt something in the dark looking back. Only pinpricks of light were visible, and the distant dwarf star that anchored the system. The chime of a read-only message sounded, and I, to my credit, did not flinch. Cleared to approach, dock with Thermopylae Station. Much had changed with the Terrans, and not all of it good from my government's view. I still remember a quip from a diplomat that had come from United Earth's government. It went something like, "What a change a year makes." Well, if my conversion from my planet's cycles to the Sol System's year was right, that conversation had happened nearly 90 years ago. Thermopylae Station didn't exist back then. The government of United Earth didn't exist anymore. Nothing about the species we had once called humans remained the same except their general appearance. What a change 90 years makes. 90 years ago, I was happy to meet the United Earth delegate, a pleasant man with dark skin with a name that our translators struggled with. He eventually just consigned to allow us to call him Tombs, which wasn't his real name. But then again, my own name he couldn't pronounce. He had called me Tika. It was a pleasant sound when he said it. They were so optimistic, the humans ready to work with us, ready to sign combined research treaties and trade agreements. They preferred diplomacy, trade, and exchange between themselves and others. They were excited at every chance to learn about the cultures of the universe. I knew that that wasn't the case today. My eyes darted to the shapes that were becoming visible, the ships and the distant but ever-expanding Thermopylae Station. Interesting fact about the Terrans, Kzia chirped. The station is named after a battle where a small group of warriors held off a massively superior enemy in their homeworld's history. I said nothing, but the name was appropriate. My own people, the Turinika, border the Raal, and long ago we consigned ourselves to the knowledge that our galactic neighbors would come at us at the first sign of weakness. They view our pacifism as beneath contempt, our worship of our god laughable. In fact, the Raal view very little as sacred besides strength, which luckily, even though we view its use as distasteful in the extreme, my people have in abundance with our fleets. I can admit to a certain level of exhaustion in dealing with the Raal at my government's request. No message I had sent in my long time as a diplomat was ever replied to or even acknowledged. In the time I've been a diplomat, even before I met Toombs, we had watched the Raal swallow 2 species back to back, until only the small nation of Chua stood between themselves and United Earth territory. The Chua were a proud people, stubborn, but very proud. They simply wanted to be left alone in their small corner of space, and the humans, while disappointed by their lack of desire to engage, respected that, as did the humans' galactic neighbors, one of which being my own people. The fall of Chua's northern galactic neighbor, the HFY, stunned the entire galactic community. While everyone expected the Raal to test the HFY, no one expected them to fail that test so spectacularly. It took the Raal only a cycle to take all of HFY space, and when the Raal took space, they made sure everyone knew about it. Needless to say, for weeks after the Raal took a planet, you didn't want to turn on the holo if you were close enough to their space for their broadcasts or didn't have an encrypted receiver. Any complaints made in the Galactic Senate chambers would be drowned out by the sick, wet sound of Raal laughter. It was during one of those sessions, fresh off of a broadcast of the HFY being hunted for sport, of HFY youths being shackled and branded in front of their birth-givers that were then executed, that the Raal ambassador came into the Galactic Senate, turned to the hues seat, and in front of all the senators present declared war on the Chua. The Chua ambassador just sat there quietly. My emotions flew to him. The Chua only possessed 4 worlds, but those worlds were connected to the wider galaxy by 8 primary hyperspace lanes. A war against the Raal wasn't a war at all, it was an execution. We of the Terratanti live very long lives, and memory is a fickle thing. Still, I remember how Toombs looked as he stood up from the United Earth seat directly behind the Chua ambassador, and immediately walked out of the Senate hearing. The Raal ambassador had not even reached his seat before Toombs returned and walked directly to the side of the Chua ambassador and whispered something in his ear. It was the first time the Chua ambassador had moved, turning to the human who towered over them, and bowed his head in what I know to be their people's expression of utmost gratitude and acceptance. Toombs then stood and loudly declared that United Earth would be honoring its defensive military pact with the Chua Republic, and formally declared war against the Raal. To this day, I can't remember ever knowing about such a pact. The Raal turned back to the two, the Chua ambassador and Toombs, and laughed. At first I thought it was blind arrogance or maybe self-preservation that caused the humans to jump to the aid of the Chua. It wasn't, at the end of the day. United Earth had long seen what the Raal were doing as predatory and disgusting. Toombs declared on several occasions that the Raal were just bullies and that the only way to stop a bully was to stand up to them. My people had entertained notions of joining a loose coalition that would stand together against attack by the Raal. But that was all they remained, entertained notions. The humans of United Earth had for years been trying to form that coalition after bringing us the idea. They had been in talks with my people, the Shivas, the Balaxi, the Duma, and even the Kolra, who responded to most requests for contact with the vilest insults they could transmit. As far as I knew, no one wanted to join with them, believing it would provoke the Raal. As my shuttle passed underneath the shadow of one of the massive human battleships emblazoned with the mark of the Terran front, I wondered if the Balaxi, Duma, Kolra, and a few others had regretted not taking the hands of the humans when it was offered. Once again, the shuttle had fallen silent. I had been in a system very similar to this one, looking at a fleet of smooth lines, lit up like a proud standard. United Earth's symbol had been emblazoned on every silvery hull, and while the humans were nervous about the war to come, they were proud to stand in defense of another, something I found quite noble in them. Forgive my ramblings. They say when a Terratanti reaches elderhood they spend most of their time remembering fondly days past, but I can't help but remember it now. I again am wondering what I'm preparing to walk into. The United Earth fleet was built to shine as a beacon of hope and a promise of a better tomorrow, as Toombs had told me, a notion I of course found preposterous. Weapons, to my people, are shameful things that are an unfortunate necessity, only to be shown when there is no other way, and hidden away the moment they are no longer needed. I had to admit back then, however, that the Terran ships, if anything, were very elegantly designed. The shadow of the battleship overhead, though, it fills me with a certain prickling sensation. All that fills my mind now as I look up at the harsh edges of gun ports, the sleek knife-like energy weapons barrels, and the simply monstrous spinal-mounted cannon, is that something has happened to this pure and noble people. Something dark, something wrong. This wasn't a beacon of hope. It was a symbol of dread, a promise of annihilation. And once again I find myself wondering why in the name of the Great Mother I came here. End of log.